From ages 16 through 18, Katniss Everdeen, the girl on fire, goes through a lot, like going from a law-breaking hunter to a tribute with 23-1 odds, which are really like the worst odds you could possibly get, to a victor, and then to the Mockingjay of the Second Rebellion. You know, normal teenage stuff. So we're gonna go over the history of those awkward years, as well as analyze the ever-living heck out of every single relationship that she's ever had in her entire life. Because why not? Katniss Everdeen was born on May 8th, some dystopian year in the future, and was raised in the seam of District 12, the non-electric city, because they have no power, which is kind of ironic because their #1 export is coal. In fact, they're the reason why all of Panem has power. And speaking of that, let me waste a lot of your time by talking about Panem. So Panem is made up of 12 districts and 1 capital. District 1 is busy producing all of the luxurious goods for the capital. District 2 is masonry. District 3 is technological inventions like the gadgets. District 4 is fishing. District 5 is electric, solar, and nuclear power. District 6 is transportation, creating stuff like the hovercrafts or the trains that you see going into the capital. District 7 is lumber. District 8 is textiles. District 9 is oh, hold on one second. District 9 is grain. District 10 is livestock. District 11 is agriculture. And then we're left with no one other than District 12, the people who mine the coal. Oh yeah, and then there was District 13, which is non-existent. And their primary focus was nuclear development. And just in case you need to know, when it comes to geography, District 12 is located in the socioeconomic regions of the central sections in the Appalachian Mountain Range. That's located all the way at the eastern end of the United States. Or what used to be the United States. 12 is a dour place filled with about 8,000 residents who are mainly coal miners. They have no cars or happiness, but they do have wagons and some goats. Come to think of it, it must be crazy for a District 12 tribute to go to the capital for the first time, because they're coming from a place that is like stuck in the late 1800s. According to the Hunger Games tribute guide, this place that I was just talking about, District 12, aka the mining district, is one of the outer districts, but nonetheless, very crucial one. These brave and hardy workers descend deep into the earth each day to mine the coal that powers our nation. The coal that keeps our nation running. Well, that's very well said and very complimentary of the people from District 12. I really prefer Katniss's description of 12 so much more, which is District 12, a place where you can starve to death in safety. It truly is a place no one cares about. In fact, here's an accurate representation of how many people care about District 12. The people who care are in red. The only time that anyone's ever gonna care about District 12 is when they're not meeting their coal quotas. Anyway, during the time of the 75th Hunger Games, Katniss' sister Primrose Everdeen, and then their mother, who apparently doesn't have a name, lived in this one house toward the end of the scene. And if I'm being 102.678935617% honest with you, Katniss did not have a good time growing up, starting with her dad doing all this dying. Like most people in District 12, Katniss' dad was a coal miner, but he ended up dying in a coal mining accident. Her dad no longer existing is kind of what prevented him from appearing in the current timeline of the Hunger Games, appropriately. Well, other than briefly appearing in flashbacks or hallucinations brought on by Track or Jack or Venom in the movies. Her dad really did pick the worst time to stop existing, because about 3 months before he just left the chat, District 12 had the most bitter January that they've ever had. So surviving the unsurvivable district became that much harder. The district gave Katniss' family enough money to cover 1 month of grieving. But during this time, Katniss' mom was supposed to get a job. She did not, mainly because she was going through it. Her mom was astronomically in love with her dad. Remember Edward's really over-the-top reaction when Bella entered the room in that one Twilight movie? It was like that level of love, but just not as intense, because I don't believe anything can be as extra as that was. Edward needs to calm down. Katniss' mom had parents who were part of the small merchant class, as they ran an apothecary shop in the nice part of District 12. Well, nicer part of District 12. It's not really saying a lot, but it's still something. The apothecary shop would mainly cater to officials and peacekeepers and the occasional resident of the seam. The mother being a healer prior to the events of the 74th Hunger Games is why she and and Prim became medics after getting taken in by District 13. There's no doctors around because no one in District 12 could afford a doctor, so the apothecaries are basically the doctor equivalent of District 12. While Katniss's father was hunting in the woods, he would collect a bunch of medicinal herbs, and then he would sell those herbs to her mother. And this is where the romance really took off, people. Her mother loved her father so much that she was willing to trade this fancy lifestyle for an impoverished life in the seam. After her father's death, Katniss's mom became unreachable. She was locked in a depressed state while Katniss and her sister starved. She'd either be sitting in a chair or laying in a bed under the blankets, zoning the heck out. Needless to say, she took his death pretty hard. This is why before leaving for the games, Katniss tells her mom,
"You can't tune out again. You have to be there for her. Do you understand?"
During the time that her mom was AFK, Katniss didn't feel like she lost one parent. She felt like she lost both. So at the age of 11 years old, Katniss had to take on the role of mother. This consisted of her trying to keep up appearances so that she and Prim didn't get sent to a community home. However, this became way more difficult when the money ran out and they started starving. Katniss wasn't 12 yet, so she couldn't sign up for Tessera, also known as food rationing from the capital. This would have supplied her with a year's worth of grain and oil, all for the low cost of entering your name in the Doom raffle a few more times. This is why they take the blood samples on Reaping Day. A worker from the capital is going to pass a small scanner over the blood sample in order to register that person's information. This is how the capital is aware of who's eligible for Tessera and who would be too old to keep receiving it. So Katniss, making the choice to be an 11-year-old, wouldn't be able to do the Tessera. So uneligible Katniss and Prim began to starve, which is cause for concern because dying from starvation in District 12 is like the #1 leading cause of death in District 12. In fact, because of how starved everyone is in District 12, the tributes from 12 are basically doomed in the arena. The weakness from lack of food essentially makes them cannon fodder. But according to the Capitol, they reassure everyone that the main cause of death in District 12 isn't from lack of food, it's mainly from sickness or sneezing too much. The sheer existence of the games prompted Katniss to say this:
"I'm never having kids."
But watching her mother become so powerless through that entire situation definitely contributed to Katniss being so adamant about not wanting to have kids and not wanting to get married. This brings us to the bread. Oh my carnivorous squirrels. The bread. So when Katniss was doing all her starving and vibing and all that, she was trying to sell old family clothing in the Hob that nobody wanted. After the market closed down for the day, she didn't want to go back to her family empty-handed. So she ended up walking through the part of town belonging to the wealthiest town people, while barely being able to stand on her feet. All forms of stealing in District 12 are not taken lightly. As punishment, stealing can and will most likely result in a thing called not being alive anymore. Nevertheless, Katniss contemplated whether or not she should go for it, as in actually stealing from one of these shops. But then she decided that rummaging through the trash is probably going to be a better idea. Less risk in that, because finding at least like bones or rotting vegetables or something like that is going to be ideal. Mainly because of the smell, she goes by Peeta's family's bakery and then begins to go through their trash. There's nothing in it, and Katniss gets yelled at by Peeta's mom. We don't like Peeta's mom too much. We don't hate her, but we don't like her. We don't know a lot about her other than her intense bitterness and polarizing demeanor. We do, however, like Peeta's dad, who is generous, and he does stuff like accepting a really uneven trade with Gale, of trading a squirrel for this sweet looking piece of bread that should be on the cover of like a magazine, if magazines were still relevant and happiness still existed in the world. He also brings Katniss cookies before she's sent into the games. So he is a pretty solid human being. But anyway, Peeta's mom has no mercy, as she threatened to call the peacekeepers on Katniss because she was sick of having brats from the seam pawning through her trash. And I'm like, ma'am, okay, the trash can was empty when Katniss opened it. So if you waited like 5 more seconds, Katniss would have moved on. Granted, she would have moved on slower than most because of the whole starving thing, but she still would have moved on. All I'm saying is that after this lovely encounter, Peeta and Katniss's wedding must have been pretty awkward when they ran into each other again. I'm just kidding. It wasn't awkward, mainly because she wasn't there, as Peeta's family got erased from the map when they firebombed District 12. Katniss was left with no options. Here's an accurate depiction of how many options she had left. The options are represented in blue. So at this point, she was willing to go to a community home or just die in the rain. But then The bread. Peeta burned some bread. Was it intentional? Who knows? Peeta's mom was upset, and she yells at Peeta, claiming that no one decent is going to buy burnt bread. I feel like that line revealed a lot of her elitist behavior. As Peeta was getting yelled at, he was told to feed the burnt bread to the pigs. He does not. When his mother disappeared to help a customer, Peeta used this opportunity to launch the pieces of bread over to Katniss. After some hesitation, Katniss shoved those loaves under her shirt and then zoomed back home as fast as she could. It was a good hearty bread that was full of raisins and nuts. Katniss, Prim, and her mother ate that bread by the slice, and it honestly saved her entire family. Since Peeta was from the better part of the district, he typically stuck with the cool kids who were like the wealthiest town people's kids, so he and Katniss never spoke. But Peeta was a real creeper, and apparently stared at Katniss from across the schoolyard, cause he totes liked her, liking her enough to receive a swollen cheek and a blackened eye from his act of generosity. Peeta liking Katniss didn't register in her brain for a while. She was so baffled by Peeta's kindness that she couldn't even comprehend why he tossed the bread her way. But that bread gave Katniss hope. The bread, paired with her seeing the first dandelion of the year, sparked a brilliant idea of how she was going to survive. By becoming the most independent and resourceful District 12er out there, Katniss was going to hunt in the wilderness just like her dad. I mean, her dad already taught her how to hunt with a bow and arrow, as well as teaching her what plants were edible and what plants were definitely not edible. Something that she definitely needed to know sometime in the future.
That's Nightlock, Peeta!
She would practice with a smaller bow that her father made for her, and then by the time that she was 16, she was already using his bow, and then storing this contraband in well-hidden sheaths beyond the fence. Katniss was named after the plant Katniss, which are tubers with tall leaves like arrowheads. You know, like the arrows that, yeah, okay. Her dad taught Katniss that as long as she finds herself, she'll never starve. According to Suzanne Collins, Katniss Everdeen owes her last name to Bathsheba Everdeen, the lead character in Far From the Madding Crowd. The two are very different, but both struggle knowing their hearts. But going back to Katniss obtaining all this knowledge about how to survive out there in the wilderness, she also had help from people like Gale, who taught her how to set traps like snares to catch squirrels or rabbits, which is why Katniss seems to thrive in the snares section of the training center, where she learned how to make even more intricate rope snares. According to Suzanne Collins was a huge fan of Greek mythology as a kid, if you couldn't already tell by the names Romulus Thread, Caesar Flickerman, Plutarch Heavensby, and so on. In fact, she was such a huge fan of Greek mythology that she went on to say that Katniss is basically the modern-day Theseus. For those sitting in the back of the classroom, in the story of Theseus, King Minos kept attacking Athens, and the king of Athens was like, whoa, hey, stop. King Aegeus, being the king of Athens, made a deal with King Minos that Minos will stop attacking Athens as long as at the end of every great year, Athens will send 7 boys and 7 girls to the island of Crete as tribute. This is where they will essentially be sacrificed to the Minotaur. After some time, Theseus is like, whoa, I'm gonna volunteer as tribute to take out the monster and put an end to this madness. When Katniss, was younger, her dad would take her to this unusually small lake, where he taught her not just how to swim, but to dive, somersault, and paddle around, unknowingly preparing her to go diving in the 75th Hunger Games, giving her the upper hand so that she can quickly reach the silver bow and arrow that Plutarch Heavensby conveniently placed in front of her plate. When Katniss would go out hunting, she snuck past this 20-foot high electrical fence fashioned with classic barbed wire loops at the top, due to all the coal being shipped to the capital, causing power shortages everywhere in Panem, but mainly District 12. This fence that is supposed to be electrified 24 hours, 7 days a week, was not. At most, it would go on for like an hour or two every other week. The capital said that they constructed this to keep animals like big bears or cougars or packs of wild dogs out of the district, which it's not. That's not the reason. The reason is not to keep animals out, but to keep people in. I know, right? Like, what solidifies this fact is the fact that the fence was fully working when Thread took over as head peacekeeper. But that's enough talk about fences for now. Then one day, the entire population of 8,000 people gather in the town square to watch a public reaping, where potential tributes from the ages of 12 through 18 wait to hear if their name is going to be called to participate in the Hunger Games. During this very unfortunate day, the name of the newly turned 12-year-old Primrose Everdeen got picked, and without much thought, her 16-year-old sister Katniss Everdeen volunteered as tribute to take her sister's place.
I volunteer as tribute!
A brave decision that apparently a lot of you would not do if you were put in her shoes. In the film version of the Hunger Games, Katniss was the first volunteer in the history of District 12.
District 12's very first
volunteer.
But in the books, it's said that they hadn't had a volunteer in a long time. I prefer the movie version of implying that no one ever volunteered, because that makes what Katniss did even more heroic. When going into the games, Katniss was wearing this gold Mockingjay pin that served as her token. In the books, Madge Undersea, daughter of Mayor Undersea, gifted it to Katniss. Oh right, there's no pictures of Madge because she wasn't in the movies, most likely because when adapting the film, somebody in the room was like, this character, she's gotta go. But don't worry, after sending her character description into the lab, we came back with a very accurate depiction of what Madge would have looked like. Even though Katniss finds it difficult to make friends sometimes, or most of the time, Madge and Katniss actually got along pretty well. Although Katniss kind of resented Madge a little bit because being the mayor's daughter meant that Madge didn't have to buy into the whole Tessera thing. So the chances of Madge being picked during the reaping were almost as impossible as someone like Prim being picked. Madge was the same age as Katniss and they were friends by circumstance. Granted, they were kind of perfect for each other. At school, they kept to themselves. They never really talked, but they would eat lunch together, sit next to each other during assemblies, partnered with each other during sports. They both hated gossipy things and talking about clothing. And by the time of the 75th Hunger Games, Madge was trying to teach Katniss the piano, and they were always eating at each other's houses. Katniss had like an actual friend. Katniss would describe Madge as all right, which if you don't already know, is the highest compliment you could receive from Katniss. It's funny because Katniss never thought they were actual friends, but that was until Madge visited Katniss before she left for the games. During that moment, she gave Katniss the Mockingjay pin, as well as a kiss on the cheek, making Katniss believe that Madge was a real one, a true friend all along. But enough about friendship. During their final goodbyes, Madge tells Katniss that you're allowed to bring one thing from your district into the arena, one thing to remind you of home, and then proceeds to ask Katniss if she'd wear this circular golden pin, the same pin that Madge was wearing on her dress earlier that day. The pin was real gold too. Okay, let's not forget about that. It was a very valuable pin. The money that you would get from selling that pin could feed an entire family for months. The pin originally belonged to Madge's aunt, Maisley Donner, someone who was a friend of Katniss's mom. She was one of the 4 tributes selected from District 12 to compete in the 50th Hunger Games. That year, they had twice as many tributes because it was the twist of the Quarter Quell. So Maisley Donner was one of the 2 female tributes sent in. And you know who was one of the 2 male tributes that year? Haymitch Abernathy. That's who. Maisley actually ended up saving Haymitch's life by shooting a career tribute with a poison-filled blow dart, as that career tribute was about to kill Haymitch. If you watch my guide to the Hunger Games Explained video, which I highly recommend, you'll know that the poison blow dart was a really fitting weapon for the arena because everything, and I mean everything, from the flowers to the water, it was poisonous. After she took out that one threatening career tribute, Maisley became allies with Haymitch, and the 2 of them stuck together until there was only 5 tributes left. The reason they broke up is because they didn't want the games to come down to just the 2 of them. Then literally like 5 seconds after ending their alliance, Maisley ended up getting attacked by this flock of candy pink birds, also known as danger flamingos. Haymitch held Maisley in his arms as she died. And this shares huge parallels with the scene where Katniss is holding Rue in her arms and singing Deep in the Meadow. But we'll talk more about that in a second. Madge, along with basically her entire family, died during the firebombing of District 12, which is really tragic. But if you only care about the movies, it's not really that tragic because she never existed. In the movies, Katniss receives the Mockingjay pin from Greasy Say in the Hob. For context, the Hob is an abandoned warehouse that once stored coal. Well, that was until the Transportation District came in and introduced a more efficient way of getting the coal into the capital. The Hob is where people trade animals that they illegally poached or just other contraband in general. It's essentially the black market of District 12, and it's a place that is illegally operating even on Reaping Day when most other shops are closed. The only reason that they allowed the Hob to exist was because peacekeepers would participate in the trade. Well, that was until Romulus Thread took over as head peacekeeper of District 12 and then burned down the Hob. But before that, when the Hob was still standing, Greasy Say would sell bowls of soup from a large kettle. Gale and Katniss usually traded with her because even though she kind of lowballed them when it came to price, Greasy would consistently buy wild dogs from them. Then she would chop up the meat and then sell it to everyone else as beef. It was kind of f***ed fucked up, but then again, so was their world. Regardless, Greasy Say apparently started a collection to sponsor Katniss and her star-crossed lover Peeta during the 74th Hunger Games. After learning about the fact that Greasy, as well as all these other vendors, started a collection pool for her and Peeta, Katniss went out of her way to frequently purchase stuff from all of them in the Hob. By the time of the 75th, Katniss was looking out for her family, Gale's family, Greasy Say, and Hob traders who were shut down. And on top of that, she would do stuff like stuff her game bag full of food in order to feed starving people around the district. For those wondering, yes, unlike Madge, Greasy survived the destruction of District 12 and worked in the kitchen of District 13 during the Second Rebellion, where she was finally able to make stew with real beef, all thanks to District 10 sending them the goods. Even though my world was destroyed after learning how they cut Madge out of the films, I do like that they chose Greasy Say to be the one to give Katniss the pin. Because in the book Mockingjay, Haymitch called on everyone to think of one incident where Katniss Everdeen genuinely moved them. Greasy Say was one of the people that Haymitch called upon. Greasy Say helped push Katniss to be the Mockingjay that was operating with unscripted moments. So it's fitting that she was the one to give the pin to Katniss. And plus, like I mentioned earlier, that pin is made of real gold. So Greasy must have really liked Katniss to give that away. According to Katniss, Mockingjays are about as rare as a rock and about as tough. In the greatest middle chapter that ever was, Madge and Katniss discuss the significance of the Mockingjay pin and how Mockingjays were all the rage in the capital. And then they try to figure out why the capital isn't deeming the Mockingjay symbol as a threat. Curious, Katniss claims that the Mockingjay is a creature the capital never intended to exist. They didn't count on the highly controlled Jabberjay having the brains to adapt to the wild, to pass on its genetic code, to thrive in a new form. They hadn't anticipated its will to live. And oh boy, does that remind you of anyone. When teaching Katniss how to hunt, her father became fond of Mockingjays. He would sing with a beautiful, high, clear voice that was filled with life, and the Mockingjays would fall silent to listen to his melody. Katniss had this in common with her dad. When Peeta was describing the moment that his crush started with Katniss, it was the first day of music assembly, and the teacher asked the class if anyone knew the Valley song. And apparently, Katniss raised her hand faster than an arrow flying past Seneca Crane's face. The teacher asked Catnip to sing, and when Peeta was like in awe listening, he said it was just like when her father used to sing. All the birds fell silent so that they could listen. I don't think we've talked about the goat of the Hunger Games yet. I'm talking about a literal goat named Lady. It was late May, just a day before Prim's birthday. Katniss and Gale were out hunting, and they spotted a 150-pound buck. They successfully hunted it down. The complete opposite of this moment in the film.
What are you gonna do with that when you kill it?
At the end of the day, Katniss and Gale made bank after trading all that deer meat. Katniss, rolling in paper, noticed the Goat Man. He's a man who lives in the seam and has a lot of goats. You know what? That may actually be why he's called the Goat Man. Huh. Katniss was eyeing this one injured goat that was about to be sold to the butcher Ruba. But don't worry, Ruba saw that Katniss was trying to buy the goat. So what does she do? Ruba comes in and she's like, I don't want this goat. The goat's no good. Thus driving the asking price of the goat way down, giving Katniss a sweet deal on the animal. When Katniss presented Prim with the goat, Prim started laughing and crying at the same time. During the chaos, Prim named the goat Lady and would go on to sell goat cheese and goat milk. Though we don't get to see Prim's goat in the movie, we still get this line.
You can sell cheese from your goat.
That's the entire reason she says this one line. Aren't you happy I explained all of that to you so you can understand this one line of dialogue? The point that I'm trying to make is that Katniss loves Prim more than anything. And because of that, the most crucial line in the series for me has to be after Joanna goes on that rant against the Capitol during the 75th. Everyone around her goes like, whoa, hey, what the heck are you doing? And then she replies,
What? Can't hurt me. There's no one left that I love.
Katniss views love as a weakness, and rightfully so. It's the one thing that the Capitol uses to control everyone. Even when in the games, Katniss was still concerned about any misstep due to her impulsive behavior, as it could result in her loved ones getting put in the danger zone. Like after pulling the stunt of all stunts and shooting the apple next to Seneca Crane's head. She didn't fear for herself, she feared that she may have put her mother in prison, or Prim in a community home, or just the Capitol getting rid of them altogether. There was also this moment moment where Snow shows Katniss and Gale at Makeout Reef, threatening her that any deviation from his plan will result in Gale getting removed from the picture too. Snow would do stuff like this to every single victor, but I will say he was more personal with Katniss. In the 50th Hunger Games, Haymitch was playing around with the boundaries of the arena, like literally jumping over the edge of the rocks and then getting thrown back up. Snow interpreted Haymitch's reckless behavior and curiosity as an act of defiance against the Capitol, resulting in Haymitch's family no longer existing. So Katniss's fear is real. Even though Peeta and Katniss had the worst act of defiance against the Capitol, as they used berries, Prim being in the spotlight and being a crucial part of the narrative that is Katniss Everdeen, it would have caused riots if they took her out of the picture as well. So that's what saved the Everdeens from execution. This is why even before the games, Katniss never spoke out against the Capitol, keeping conversations in public markets very brief and simple, and definitely not complaining about important things, like the fact that there's no food. Overall, setting a good example for Prim, because Katniss doesn't want her to get in trouble as well. Gale, on the other hand, was always a radical when it came to talks of revolution. Katniss never contributed, but always put up with his rants, as she was more focused on her immediate surroundings and keeping her loved ones alive rather than changing the political landscape of their world. A really good example of Katniss's hesitancy to defy the Capitol in any way, shape, or form was the moment that was left out of the movies. In the first book, Gale and Katniss are out in the woods hunting. They encounter a redheaded girl and a boy in tattered clothes and dark circles under their eyes, overall rocking the classic look of "I've been on the run from the law for the past like 2 weeks." They were definitely not from District 12. In fact, they were from the Capitol, and they made it all the way to District 12. Upon seeing them, Katniss and Gale were like frozen, just out of shock. Then a hovercraft appeared out of nowhere, dropping a net on the girl and then carrying her away, and then throwing a spear through the boy. Before the girl got lifted into the sky, she made eye contact with Katniss, and she called out for help. However, Katniss and Gale just stood there like deers in the headlights. Then something really awkward happened when Katniss went to the Capitol. The redheaded girl that called out for help was an Avox, serving Katniss and her team at the training center. By the way, an Avox is someone from the Capitol who turns on the Capitol, either by running away or classic mutiny. Their punishment for defiance is having their tongue cut out and being forced to act as a servant for the rest of their life. Luckily, Katniss was not allowed to speak to the Avox unless she gave her an order, so she avoided as much contact with the girl as she possibly could. But there was this one night where Katniss just started eating herself sick in her room. She stuffed her face with an outrageous number of delicacies, then proceeded to like smash a bunch of dishes. Most scholars would assume that Katniss was letting out some unfiltered rage against the Capitol, given her current situation. When the Avox girl runs in to clean up the mess, Katniss expects the girl to hate her and resent her. But instead, the Avox comforts her. Katniss whispers to the girl, "I should have saved you." But then the girl, unable to talk because she's an Avox, gives a hand gesture implying that Katniss would have been in her shoes if she intervened, or even killed. Because knowing the Capitol, that's always an option. Actually, I think Katniss would have definitely been killed because she wasn't a citizen of the Capitol rebelling against it. She was just someone from the districts. At that moment, Katniss feels guilty for receiving protection from this girl, even though Katniss never provided her any. Then Katniss encounters multiple other girls in the forest who she can actually save, Rue being one of them. Rue is able to save Katniss from the career tributes by pointing out a conveniently placed tracker jacker nest that was resting right above her in the tree line. And I'm just sitting over here like, Katniss, really? You didn't notice the flying death machines hovering over your head this entire time? After dropping the nest and giving the career tributes and Peeta the most uncomfortable wake-up call of their lives, Katniss was able to pick up the silver bow and arrows from Glimmer's lifeless corpse. The reason why Rue knew how to treat Katniss with the leaves was because she came from the agricultural district, a place where the Capitol left a lot of tracker jacker nests, mainly in the orchards where everyone works. So it's implied that they're constantly having to treat these stings. During their very hazardous work, Rue and the other workers in her district would sing throughout the day. That's why Rue liked Katniss's Mockingjay pin. Rue even claims that seeing the Mockingjay on her pin is what made her trust Katniss in the first place. Rue was friends with the Mockingjays, as she usually had to climb up the highest in the trees, where the Mockingjays would reside. She would sing back and forth with the Songbirds for hours. Rue, being at the top of the tree line, she would be the first one to see the red flag that signals it's quitting time. Then she would sing a special song, a little 4-note run. letting everyone know that it's quitting time, a song that would later be used by her district and other districts to aid in the Second Rebellion. I know what you may be thinking. Why was Rue, a 12-year-old, working when she should have been in school? Like, not even District 12 has it that bad. And they're District 12. Well, during a conversation between Rue and Katniss, Rue states that the kids get a break from school so that they can all work during the harvest. This is the first time that Katniss really learned about life in another district, because the capital didn't really want the districts communicating with each other because of the whole divide and conquer thing. So needless to say, this conversation was clearly blocked out by the Capitol. Her thought process was that if it came down to just her and Rue, Katniss was going to keep Rue alive, something she failed to do. I guess Suzanne Collins really liked poetry. In both Catching Fire and Hunger Games 1, Katniss kills a District 1 tribute by shooting an arrow at them right after they kill her favorite ally. In the first one, she shoots an arrow in Marvel's chest after he kills Rue, and in Catching Fire, she shoots an arrow in Gloss's chest after he kills Wirus. After Rue's death, Katniss lays a bunch of hand-picked flowers around her, a symbol for her respect for Rue, while also serving as a big you to the Capitol, because they're gonna have to broadcast the hovercraft picking her body out of the arena, forcing them to show Katniss's gesture to every single district. When leaving Rue, Katniss does the whole 3-finger salute, a symbol for admiration and saying goodbye to someone that you love. It's something that holds a completely new meaning after this moment, as it becomes a symbol used for the Second Rebellion. In the books, Rue's district, District 11, sends Katniss a seed-filled bread, kind of like the one that Peeta tossed her on that rainy night. Bread seems to be a popular food item in the Hunger Games, like bread. And when Katniss was describing Thresh saving her life by knocking out Clove, she says that Thresh used a rock that was the size of a loaf of bread. In Catching Fire, while out hunting, Katniss runs into Bonnie and Twill. Twill was in her mid-30s and Bonnie was just a teenager. The two of them escaped from District 8 and they were trying to reach District 13. This was right after District 8 had their little uprising. The uprising happened during Peeta's proposal to Katniss, as this event was a mandatory viewing for all of Panem. So District 8 used this opportunity to have more people, aka rebels, out in the street after dark. And at 8 o'clock, the uprising took place. Do you get it? Because District 8 and 8 o'clock, it's because they had teams of people ready to take the Justice Building, the Peacekeepers headquarters, and the Communication Center in the square. At 8 o'clock, the crowd of District 8ers overran the Peacekeepers, and everything was going according to plan. It was a good day. But then the Peacekeepers arrived by the thousands, followed by a bunch of hovercrafts. District 8's main city was destroyed, taking out Twill's husband and Bonnie's entire family. Then the residents were put under lockdown. Among the chaos, Bonnie and Twill stole some Peacekeepers uniforms and then booked it. But because they were from District 8, also known as the Textile Factory Hellscape, where you couldn't find a single blade of grass, the two of them had no idea how to survive out in the wild. Katniss looked at Bonnie the same way that she looked at Rue. So naturally, Katniss taught them how to keep themselves alive out in the wilderness of District 12. But apparently, she didn't do that good of a job, because Bonnie and Twill never made it to District 13. After Katniss chose Megs as an ally, she suddenly remembered that Megs replaced the young hysterical woman in her district, that woman being Annie Crusta. Megs didn't do it because she thought she could win the 75th. She did it to save Annie, just like Katniss volunteering for Prim.
I volunteered!
Katniss saw Prim and Rue, but she saw herself in Megs. After learning about how people like Ruba, Madge, and Peeta's dad really did look out for Katniss, it adds a lot more weight behind this scene where Katniss views her destroyed district for the first time. Catching Fire is the figurative GOAT of the series. I think it's like the Empire equivalent of the Hunger Games, because it manages to do so many things right. Like this moment at the end of the film. Up until this point, the way that the Capitol kept control over everyone was by threatening death of your friends, family, or anyone that you loved. But when Katniss learns that District 12 was destroyed, she understands that as long as Snow is in charge, death is inevitable. So she sheds any previous notion of having to abide by what the Capitol wants. So I love that her face goes from distress, like how she's been throughout the entire series, to angry, marking the true moment of fire catching and her taking action. It was Cinna who volunteered as a stylist for Katniss after he watched Katniss volunteer for her sister. When first arriving at the Capitol, Katniss had to go through the Remake Center, where a bunch of skilled beauty experts scrubbed away the dirt and the grime from each tribute to make them look like human beings again. It's a thorough process, removing anything that makes them look like they're from the districts by giving them exfoliating cream, brushing their hair, giving them manicures, pedicures, really the whole nine. So after going through that nightmare, you could imagine her relief when she saw someone like Cinna. Katniss was taken back by how normal he looked. As most of the stylists Katniss saw in the past were very dyed, stenciled, and surgically altered to the point of grotesqueness. But Cinna looked good and normal, signifying that he was resistant to certain ideals of the capital. During the tribute parade, Katniss rode in on 12's chariot, dressed like a burning piece of coal, trailing with synthetic fire. The synthetic fire also makes an appearance in her first interview, and from that moment, Katniss was referred to as the girl on fire. And outside of the synthetic fire, she was quite literally the girl on fire, as she gets burned in every single book, whether it would be from the firewalls brought on by Seneca Crane, the poisonous fog that burns her skin in the Clock of Doom arena, or the burns from the exploding parachutes. And the two most notable people in her family were lost to an explosion. She lost her father in the mining accident and her sister to the parachutes. Snow lands on top, but you know what melts snow? That weird spray from the Frosty the Snowman home video, Frosty's Return. You remember that freaky like aerosol spray that they would spray at the snow and then the snow would just vanish from existence? Anyway, fire. Fire also melts snow. By the time of catching fire, Katniss loved going through Cinna's sketchbooks of clothing designs that he came up with specifically for her. Even though Katniss wasn't into fashion, she loved everything that Cinna designed for her, especially these kinds of outfits made of kitten soft wool. Oh, and apparently Cinna even did the embroidery stitches on Annie's gown for the wedding. I know that has absolutely nothing to do with Katniss. I just thought that was a cool detail. At first, Cinna was using the fire to help Katniss get sponsors, but by the time of the 75th Hunger Games, Cinna was on the side of the Second Rebellion, so he turned her into the Mockingjay as his way of fighting against the Capitol. In that moment, the Mockingjay dress wouldn't have endangered Katniss. It would, however, endanger her stylist, who is in charge of what the tribute wears, aka Cinna. After the announcement of the Quarter Quell, Cinna designed this Mockingjay combat uniform. Then he made Plutarch Heavensbee promise not to show Katniss the uniform until she decided to be the Mockingjay on her own free will. So when Katniss agrees to be District 13's Mockingjay, Plutarch Heavensbee hands Katniss one of Cinna's sketchbooks. She opens it to see a picture of herself standing straight and strong in this black Mockingjay uniform. Each page of this book was dedicated to a specific detail on the uniform, whether that would be the layers of protective armor, boots that grip to asphalt on contact and spring free of it on release, hidden weapons in those boots, hidden weapons in the belt, and even special reinforcements around the heart. On the final page of the sketchbook was a sketch of the Mockingjay pen, and Cinna having written that he's still betting on Katniss. After seeing this, Gale claims that Katniss is going to be the best dressed rebel in history. I can't help but to think of this moment in the books when discussing Cinna. On her way to the arena of the 74th Games, the one thing that distracts Katniss is the view from the windows of the hovercraft. Before the windows darken, they sail over the city and then to the wilderness beyond. Katniss claims that this is what the birds see, only they're free and safe, the very opposite of me. But with Cinna's help, he figuratively and literally turned Katniss into the free bird of the Mockingjay. Cinna was one of the first people to turn the Capitol's greatest weapon against them. Good old propaganda. At first, Haymitch, being Katniss's mentor, made Katniss feel like she was kind of doomed in the arena. In the books, when Katniss volunteered for her sister, Haymitch claimed that he liked her and that he thought she had spunk. Then he plummets off stage, knocking himself unconscious because he'd been drinking. Well, he was less of a wreck in the movies. It didn't change the fact that Katniss didn't want him as her mentor, and Haymitch clearly did not want to do his job, especially after watching 44 of his past tributes lose in the games. So needless to say, the two of them didn't get along at first. However, Peeta, being the incredible human being that he is, got Haymitch to start feeding him advice, so subsequently Katniss started receiving advice. During this week of training, Haymitch eventually warms up to the two of them and starts to care about their survival, to the point where he stops drinking in order to have a clear mind so that he can coach them through stuff like the evaluation. Katniss listened to Haymitch's strategies when it came to like not heading into the cornucopia and instead running in the opposite direction and finding water, as well as having to play the part of Peeta's love interest in order to get more sponsors. I think at the end of the day, Haymitch actually cared about Katniss more than he did Peeta, mainly due to how much Katniss reminded Haymitch of himself. The bitter, under the influence Haymitch would have been the future Katniss if things went differently in the arena. Haymitch and Katniss were very similar. They both had this impulsive, rebellious nature to them, especially when it came to everything they do. Katniss's weapon of choice is this handmade wooden bow and arrow, but at the training center they gave her a silver bow and arrow, and this took some getting used to, as it had an entirely different feel from the bow that her dad made, and she couldn't practice with the silver bow beforehand, otherwise that would reveal her special skill to all of the other tributes, so she failed. Annoyed that the game makers are ignoring her, Katniss shoots an arrow past Seneca, Berry Eater, Crane, and this is just something you're not supposed to do. Plus, the tributes are supposed to be dismissed by the game makers, so when Katniss decides to take a bow and dismiss herself from the room after shooting an arrow next to the head game maker's head. She was not making the situation any better. The only reason Katniss's family didn't suffer from this particular stunt was because it happened behind closed doors, and no one from the public, not even citizens of the Capitol, can view the evaluation. However, Haymitch's family was axed by Snow due to a rebellious act that he did in the games, something that was very public, as he was playing around with the boundaries of the arena. The moment Katniss votes yes for the Hunger Games reboot, she looks towards Haymitch and thinks to herself, this is the moment when we find out just how alike we are, how much Haymitch truly understands her. Haymitch votes with the Mockingjay, proving how much they are alike and how much they get each other. During the 75th games, Haymitch promised Katniss that he would save Peeta over her, a promise that he actually did end up breaking, as District 13 let the Capitol claim Peeta, causing Katniss to be kind of angry at Haymitch. Well, it did take a good chunk of time for the two of them to start talking again. Haymitch was the right person to lead Katniss through the whole Mockingjay propaganda, or propos. No one could really do a good job at coaching Katniss because she was honestly like the worst performer. But Haymitch served as a good guide and knew how to fully utilize her abilities, like putting the cameras on Katniss in a less active war zone in order to get that genuine reaction out of her. As the only time Katniss is really inspiring is when she's being authentic. I mean, we all know how the initial filming of the propos went, and we all know how the terribly scripted Victor tour went.
Panem today, Panem tomorrow.
Tell us what you really think.
I love that Lucy Gray was the one to teach Snow about how to put on a good performance. Snow would later use this knowledge to better develop the Hunger Games in order to have more control over the districts and build his empire. However, the one thing that took him down was the authenticity of someone who couldn't perform. I think it's safe to say that Katniss and Joanna didn't get along when they first met, starting off with the fact that Joanna started changing out of her parade costume right in front of her fiance. In the arena, her and Katniss were reluctant allies. I think the moment that really solidified Katniss's trust in Joanna was when Joanna rips the tracker out of Katniss's arm and then tells her to play dead. Joanna played a huge part in the Second Rebellion. However, she wasn't part of the Star Squad going into the Capitol. But why? Well, deep within District 13, they constructed artificial city blocks of the Capitol for SSC, also known as simulated street combat, where an instructor takes you through missions like destroying a target, searching a home, or gaining a position. Within these artificial city blocks are traps like hidden mines, a random sniper on the roof, faulty weapons, a crying child to lead you into an ambush, something that Katniss would very much fall victim to, as she is very willing to put a child's life in front of her own. In preparation for the invasion of the Capitol, Katniss and Joanna had to go through this training, as well as rigorous workouts, drills, weapons practice, and lectures on tactics. Joanna and Katniss were doing pretty well, and they would excel past most of their squad mates. However, Haymitch would later inform Katniss that they flooded the city blocks during the training. Unbeknown to Katniss, the Capitol tortured Joanna with water and electrical shocks, causing her to go into a panic during the exercise. She lost all track of who she was and where she was. Katniss witnessed Joanna go from this proficient swimmer during the Quarter Quell to someone who couldn't even take a shower. So that's why Joanna wasn't sent into the Capitol. So it was pretty reckless of them to send in Peeta. The only reason Peeta was allowed to come on the adventure was to strengthen the morale for the rest of the districts. At that point, Peeta had been working for Snow, and if they could just show him on the side of the Second Rebellion, it would be incredibly effective propaganda. Reckless, but effective. But wait a second, Haymitch was a previous victor, so why wasn't he part of Katniss's Star Squad? Well, that's because Plutarch needed as many young and attractive victors in the propos. Burn. But amongst the chaos and revolution, we have to make very important decisions concerning the guys. Like, are we picking Gale or are we picking Peeta? Katniss recognized that Gale was objectively attractive, but viewed him more as a brother. She didn't friend zone him, she brothered him. She knew that the other girls at school liked him, almost as much as Edward liking Bella and Twilight. But the only reason that Katniss became jealous is because she didn't want to lose a good hunting partner. It was a shame too, because her and Gale had a lot in common, starting with the fact that they both hunted to provide for their families, or how both their dads lost their lives in the same mining accident. Their bond was strong, as they kept each other's families alive and promised to look out for each other's families if one of their names got picked during the reaping. Gale also shares a lot of the fire fire that Katniss has. He was always more of a radical when it came to any talks of revolution. As I mentioned earlier, Katniss would listen, but she didn't entertain his rants, as she was more focused on her family. But then come the time of the Second Rebellion, the fire really ignited in her. However, there was a small difference between their fires that really did break their relationship. Katniss not wanting to become the driving force of the Second Rebellion caused her to have a more level-headed approach when it came to everything. She still had standards and didn't want to lower herself to the level of the morally bankrupt capital.
With that kind of thinking, you can kill whoever you want. You can send kids off to the Hunger Games to keep the districts in line.
Then we have Peeta, someone who must be protected at all costs. In terms of personality, Katniss is a cat, and Peeta is basically this. It was Peeta's dad who initially wanted to marry Mrs. Everdeen. His father told Peeta that she ran off with some coal miner, aka Katniss's dad. Then when they were like 5, Peeta saw Katniss and instantly had a crush on her. For 11 years, Peeta tried to work up the courage to talk to that girl, and all it took was a corrupt system pitting the two of them against each other and 22 other tributes in order to get them to talk. It was just that easy. During the interview process, Caesar Flickerman was skilled at hyping up the audience and had the ability of coaxing shy tributes out of their shells. But then he met Katniss, and he struggled. However, Peeta did fine. During the interviews of the 74th Hunger Games, Peeta confesses that he has an incomprehensible love for Katniss. And when he does it in the books, it's way more embarrassing for Katniss because the cameras were pointed directly at her face, broadcasting her blushing red face to all of Panem. In Katniss's mind, this made her look very weak to the other tributes. And from the start, she avoided doing things like crying on stage after volunteering for her sister, doing a good job of keeping cool and collected so that the other tributes don't look at her as prey. But then Peeta just went ahead and did this.
Because she came here with me.
Which is why Katniss has this reaction. After Katniss realizes that Peeta saying all that crush stuff was in order to get sponsors, she calmed down a little bit, and then the game started, with Peeta throwing her the piece of bread, helping her get more sponsors, and saving her from Cato. Katniss felt like she kept owing the boy, when the game makers recklessly changed the rules last minute, and allow for 2 victors of the same district to be able to both win the Hunger Games. Katniss finds Frosting Boy disguised like a tree trunk and looking like a mood. The damage report was that Peeta had an infected cut from Cato, causing blood poisoning, and he was still suffering from a few Tracker Jacker stings. When Katniss got called to the feast, Peeta didn't want Katniss to attend the feast and retrieve the medicine to cure his blood poisoning. However, Katniss was honestly fallen in like with the guy at this point. Plus, she finally found a way to pay him back for saving her life multiple times. So she did. She finally paid it back. They were even. And then Katniss goes ahead and injures herself, and Peeta ends up taking care of her again. Remember when I said Thread turned on the electric fence again? Well, Katniss snuck past the fence before they turned it back on, as the peacekeepers were trying to keep her locked out on the other side of it. But being Katniss Everdeen, the girl who climbs trees, she climbed about 25 feet into the air, and then she found a branch that would like go over the fence. Then she strategically fell into a snowbank. During this strategic fall, she injured her left foot and tailbone. Peeta ended up taking care of Katniss during her recovery. He would do stuff like bring her cheese bread, carrying her downstairs so that she could have a change in scenery, and most importantly, helping her work on her family book. In this book, her mother wrote out a list of plants, and then next to those plants were descriptions about their medical purposes. Katniss's dad also added a bunch of edible plants into this book. Katniss wanted to make contributions of her own, but she needed her Pieta, who was the artist out of the group, to draw the plants in exact detail. This is where the two of them really got to spend a lot of time with each other away from the audience and the public eye. For the first time, they genuinely got to know each other. Oh, and there's another moment that was left out of the movies. It was like a day before the interviews of the 75th Hunger Games. Katniss and Peeta snuck up to the roof of the Quarter Quell Training Center. They ordered a bunch of food and had a day-long picnic. This is where Katniss worked on things like weaving, and Peeta ended up drawing pictures of her. After the 74th Games, Katniss was incredibly confused about her feelings for Peeta. Peeta was deeply in love with her and was clearly not happy after he learned that Katniss made a lot of that stuff up. But we could tell from the recovery of the tailbone time and the time that they spent on that rooftop that Katniss was really starting to fall in love with Peeta. It's just that she found it difficult to separate what she truly felt and what she had to pretend to be, as the relationship was tainted by the facade she had to put on. Katniss wasn't really aware of her feelings. I love this moment where you can see how caught off guard Finnick is when he watches Katniss prove that her love for Peeta is genuine. He's like, whoa, Whoa, okay. I wasn't expecting that. Speaking of Finnick, I'm gonna go on a quick tangent about Finnick, and no one can stop me. Being a more desirable victor. The Capitol turned Finnick into playing the part of a charismatic, narcissistic playboy, similar to how Katniss had to play the part of someone who was deeply and incomprehensibly in love with Peeta. She and Finnick were still playing the game, doing whatever it took to survive and keep their loved ones safe. At first, Katniss and Finnick's relationship was very transactional, starting with Katniss giving Finnick an hour of archery instruction in exchange for an hour of trident lessons. But Katniss learned to trust Finnick a little bit more after he resuscitated Peeta back to life after Peeta was on the brink of death from slamming his machete into the electromagnetic shield surrounding the arena. You know, a common way to gain someone's trust. But their friendship really took off when they were in District 13, and the Capitol took Peeta and Annie as prisoners. Annie's disappearance broke Finnick, causing him to go from this charismatic smooth talker to a vulnerable wreck. Same with Katniss. Her love for Peeta kind of breaks away these walls and barriers that she's built up her entire life. So Finnick and Katniss could relate to each other that way, and talk to each other about what it's like to have the person you love in danger. There's a moment where Katniss asks Finnick, "How do you bear the weight of loving someone that much?" And Finnick replies, "You don't. You just distract yourself as much as possible." I love the contrast between these two moments with Finnick and Katniss. The first one being Finnick acting all suave and creepy as he's trying to teach Katniss how to tie the ropes. Then in District 13, when Finnick is the nervous wreck, he's constantly tying and untying rope in order to distract himself. Then he gives Katniss his only piece of rope, and then he says, "First thing tomorrow, we'll get you your own rope." It's just such a wholesome moment. Finnick ends up saving Katniss's life from those really scary rose-scented humanoid lizards by dying in the most unnecessary death in cinematic and literary history. Anyway, when in the Clock of Doom, Peeta gives Katniss a pearl as a gift.
Thank you.
A reference to one of Effie's interesting rants about how if you put a piece of coal, Katniss and Peeta being the coal in this metaphor, that if you put a piece of coal under enough pressure, it will turn into a pearl. Even though, as Katniss points out, coal doesn't turn into pearls. Pearls grow in shellfish. She meant coal turns into diamonds, but that's also untrue. In the books, when Peeta holds up the pearl, he jokingly quotes Effie. So I like how this endearing moment was making fun of Effie's ignorance in front of all of Panem. The second gift that Peeta gives Katniss is this gold rectangular locket containing a picture of her nameless mother, Prim, and Gale. So much to analyze about this. In the books, it said that Prim's picture was of her laughing, which it's not here. At first, I kind of found it strange that these pictures kind of just look like screenshots of the actual film. Like, this photo is literally a screenshot of her mom watching her daughter get called into the games. It's not the most ideal picture to remind you of fond memories. However, in my headcanon explanation of this, I think that Peeta just grabbed screenshots from the actual broadcast of the games, because maybe he couldn't find pictures of any member of Katniss's family. Or they just got lazy and didn't want to take new photos for the production design. Who's to say? Peeta gives her the symbolic gesture that she should be the one who lives in the game, because people actually need her. Peeta's family would mourn for his loss for sure, but people actually rely on Katniss. In Peeta's mind, no one needed Peeta. Little did he know, the one person that did need him was Katniss.
I need you.
But things got a little complicated after Katniss shot her arrow at the roof of the arena, causing the whole thing to go like pew pew and like psh, giving District 13 the opportunity to take Katniss and giving the Capitol the opportunity to take Peeta. What happened to the Bigfoot monster living in the 6 to 7 o'clock zone? No idea. Things got even more complicated after the Capitol altered Peeta's memories using Tracker Jacker venom, making him think that Katniss is like a monster, prompting him to try to eliminate Katniss. Yeah, things got pretty complicated after that. I'm just gonna say it. Katniss never really loved Gale, at least not on the level that she loved Peeta. Gale even acknowledges this when he tells Katniss that she only shows him affection when he's hurting. Gale's willingness to sink to the Capitol's level kind of ruined his chances with Catnip. As Primrose, the entire reason we all got into this mess was one of the many Capitol citizens erased from the map by the parachute packages. This form of attack was something Gale thought of and condoned District 13 using. While he may not have been directly involved with this specific attack, he might as well have been. After the loss of Prim, Katniss reflects on her and Gale meeting in the woods, wondering what could have been if the two of them escaped like Gale always dreamt of. Would they have been happy out there in the wild? Or would the dark, twisted sadness between them grow even without the Capitol's help? implying that Katniss never truly loved him, and that her and Gale would have never lasted together. She didn't need Gale, who like her is full of fire. She needed Peeta, who is the dandelion in the spring. To Katniss, yellow means rebirth instead of destruction. And Katniss was right about Peeta being this yellow dandelion of rebirth, because in Prim's memory, Peeta ventured out into the woods to dig up primroses so that he could plant them around Katniss's house. Over time, Katniss and P-Dog, they came back together, as Katniss helped Peeta sort through his memories, determining what's real and what was just the capital. Remember earlier in this video when I was talking about the whole "Snow lands on top" quote? Well, you know what? All this talk about President Snow's family mantra, "Snow lands on top," is surprisingly reminding me of the character President Coriolanus Snow. Oh boy. Do I know how to segue? We don't know the specific details of how President Snow got to the position of president, but we do know that he definitely got to that position by poisoning every single person around him, even allies that he thought may be a threat in the future. Snow hated Katniss for a lot of reasons. The biggest reason, other than her aiding in the whole tearing down his empire and everything he's ever built thing, would be how the girl on fire reminded him of Lucy Gray Baird. Like Katniss, Lucy was a tribute from District 12. During the 10th Games, Snow was attending the academy in the capital, where Dr. Volumnia Gall, the head game maker and mastermind behind the capital's experimental weapons division, decided that 24 of the academy's best and brightest seniors would mentor their own tribute. The mentors were there to help add ideas to the games and make their tribute more likable so that the audience had someone to root for. The mentors would mostly just prepare their tribute for a round of interviews and 5 minutes to present them to all of Panem. Lucy and Snow got to know each other pretty well through this process. In fact, they got to know each other so well that Snow was fallen in like with the girl. The first thing that Katniss did that I feel reminded Snow of Lucy was when Katniss was singing Deep in the Meadow to Rue. This is a song that once made Snow's anxieties melt away, a song that made him appreciate the beautiful nature surrounding him when he was in District 12. As Lucy sang Deep in the Meadow, he considered giving up wealth, money, and power in order to run off into the woods with her. When Lucy was in the 10th Hunger Games, Snow would do stuff, Snow would pull some shenanigans, like throwing a handkerchief just smothered in Lucy's scent into the snake pit so that Gall's snakes wouldn't destroy her in the arena, as well as giving Lucy his mother's compact filled with rat poison so that she could use rat poison on the other tributes. This didn't work in Snow's favor, as Highbottom had Snow expelled from the academy and sent off to being a peacekeeper. Making the best out of a bad situation, Snow requested that he would be sent back to District 12, something that absolutely no one argued with because it's District 12. This is where Snow was exposed to the Mockingjays. Did I give the origin story with the whole Mockingjays yet? During the war, the capital created genetically modified animals called mutations. But we being the cool cats, we call them mutts. These lab-made creatures could be something like the Jabberjays, a bird that could act like a parrot and repeat human vocals. These birds were trained by the capital to listen in on enemy conversations, and then fly back to the capital to repeat what they were saying. The Jabberjays ended up mating with female mockingbirds, creating a brand new species called the Mockingjay. They don't enunciate words like the Jabberjays, but they do repeat whistles and human melodies. This new species has the ability to recreate songs with multiple verses, making it the perfect songbird for someone like Lucy Gray. The first time Snow saw a Mockingjay, he hated it. He especially didn't like the sound of the Mockingjays repeating the melody of prisoners being executed. After listening to Lucy perform the song Deep in the Meadow, Snow noticed the lack of Jabberjays and was starting to assume that the Mockingjays began reproducing without them. He innately hated how the Mockingjay was getting out of the capital's control, so he suggested to his commander that they use the Mockingjays as a form of target practice. So of course, even after all these years, Snow would definitely hate the girl rocking the Mockingjay pin and singing that song. After arriving in 12, Snow eventually found Lucy Gray, who lived in the Seam, the same place that Katniss lived. Lucy would perform at the Hob with her covey, and after reuniting, the two of them had a pretty good time together, but slowly realized how vastly different they were. At the time, Snow's fellow peacekeeper, Sejanus Plinth, was plotting with the rebels. He was gonna help them escape District 12 and go out to the wilderness and potentially District 13, so Snow recorded Plinth with the Jabberjay saying all this treacherous stuff, and then Snow sent it back to the capital, specifically to Dr. Volumnia Gall. Snow wanted Plinth out of the district, and he figured that if he got Plinth in trouble, Plinth's dad, who was a wealthy ammunitions dealer for the capital, would bail Plinth out, as per usual. This didn't happen. The mayor's daughter, Mayfair Lip, walked in and she's like, I know about your escape plan and I'm gonna tell the mayor, aka my dad. So Snow killed her. And when Billy Tope, also known as Lucy's ex, said that he would kill Lucy Gray, Spruce then killed Billy. Spruce hid the evidence and they should have been all good, right? But because of that jabberjay that Snow sent back to the Capitol, they put 2 and 2 together and thought that Plinth was the one who executed the crime. So they executed him. It was a mess. But all you have to know is that Snow betrayed someone who considered him a brother. Snow killed Bobbin in the arena, Mayfair, and was responsible for Plinth's execution, which is a total kill count of 3 people. Even though Plinth took the fall, Snow knew that the evidence was still out there. He assumed that he would be found out eventually, as they may discover the DNA on one of the weapons used to commit the crime. So he and Lucy made a plan to run for it, escaping into the wilderness, doing the thing that Gale and Katniss always talked about. When Snow and Lucy are doing all their escaping, they discuss the relief of not having to kill anyone since they're going to be in the wild, away from civilization. But Snow lets it slip that killing 3 people was enough for him, something that makes Lucy suspicious, as she thought that he just killed Bobbin and Mayfair, 2 very justifiable deaths. But who was the third? Snow tries to save himself by saying that he killed the old version of himself so that he could escape with her, but Lucy didn't buy it. And then they rested at the shed where Snow conveniently found the weapons from his crime. As Snow contemplated getting rid of the weapons and then going back to the Capitol, Lucy left him to go dig up some Katniss, but she never returned. Snow went out searching for Lucy, but all of her tracks led him to this orange scarf that was laying across from these briars. This scarf was accompanied by a snake, so when he picked it up, the snake bit him. Then dozens, and I mean dozens of mockingjays, Snow's favorite creature, began to sing Lucy's song, The Hanging Tree. This is the last song that Snow heard Lucy sing. It's a song that Mr. Everdeen sang to Katniss when she was a kid. They were singing it and making necklaces out of scraps of old rope, like how it's said in the song. She didn't really understand the meaning of the song, and I guess her father didn't really either. How it was about a former District 12 coal miner named Arlo Chance, who was executed for a crime. While his occupation may have been a coal miner, Arlo was still a rebel fighting the First Rebellion. He thought that he could hurt the Capitol by blowing up the mines to stop coal production, but when carrying out his plan, he accidentally killed 3 people, so he was executed at the Hanging Tree. Then Miss Everdeen, or Mrs. Everdeen at the time, walked in on Katniss and her dad making these necklaces of rope. She did not take it well. In fact, she started yelling. Katniss cried and became overwhelmed because, she never really heard her mother yell before. Katniss ran away from the yelling and to her favorite hiding spot, which was in the meadow, specifically under this honeysuckle bush, a place that we're going to talk about in just a second. Katniss's dad found her and immediately comforted her, and they both came to the agreement that they would never sing the song again. The reason her mom got mad is because she claims that the song was too twisted for a 7-year-old. At the time, citizens of District 12 were still being executed in the way that's described in the song. Other than Miss Everdeen, a lot of people didn't like this song. Commander Hoff of District 12's peacekeepers prohibited anyone from singing this song because it was too rebellious. Lucy leaves Snow with the Hanging Tree, letting him know that she knows about the fact that he's responsible for the death of the pacifist known as Sejanus Plinth, creating a new meaning to the line, a man who murdered 3, as well as the necklace of rope, and all of that. At the end of the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, Snow thought that Lucy could fly around District 12 all she liked, but she and the Mockingjays could never harm him again. And oh boy, was he wrong. Knowing how much the Mockingjays mocked him after Lucy abandoned him, I found it interesting that Snow didn't immediately ban the Mockingjay symbol out of his own personal hatred for the animal and his uncomfortable memories with Lucy. But then again, he was a more calculated leader by the time of the 74th Hunger Games. And like the previous higher-ups in the Capitol, he underestimated the resilient nature of the Mockingjay. But Snow eventually did ban the symbol after everyone from the Capitol was obsessed with it. Like even his own granddaughter was trying to make herself look more like Katniss. During the Second Rebellion, Katniss sings The Hanging Tree, a song that inspires the rebels to blow up the dam helping power the Capitol. In the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, before Lucy's interview, she claims that the show's not over until the Mockingjay sings. While we don't see Snow's reaction when Katniss is singing this song, I'd like to imagine that he thought of Lucy's words when watching Katniss's performance. Like Katniss and Snow, Lucy basically became an orphan. The Capitol took away her covey, her ability to travel, and the ability to sing certain songs. And even when people like Dr. Gall, a erase the memory of Lucy Gray by destroying any copy of the 10th Hunger Games. It didn't work. Like the Mockingjays, the Capitol intended for Lucy to die out, but the Capitol failed once again, as her songs live on. No one knows the fate of Lucy Gray, but it's sort of implied that she may be a relative of Katniss. They both lived in the seam, they both are remarkable singers, they both know a lot about herbs and plant life surrounding the seam, but I think the main indicator of this was that the last thing Lucy said to Snow was that she was going to dig up Katniss, the name of the freaking main character of the trilogy. While Snow did play mind games with Katniss, like leaving the White Roses in her Victor's Village house or outside of District 13, he never lied to her. And even though they both hated each other with a fiery passion, Snow never gave Katniss a reason to doubt the validity of his words. President Alma Coin never wanted Katniss to be the primary symbol of the Second Rebellion. In fact, she claimed that they should have rescued Peeta in the arena first. It was Plutarch Heavensbee who placed his faith in Katniss and pushed for her to be the Mockingjay. Remember that one weird moment when Snow was opening up his mansion to refugees for their safety? But really it was for Snow's protection, as he basically formed a human shield around his place, because if the Capitol really wanted to safeguard its citizens, they would have just put them in a bunker somewhere, not in front of the residence of the most wanted man in the nation. Coin was the one who approved the whole hovercraft with the seal of the Capitol dropping bombs disguised as emergency rations onto the citizens of the Capitol. At first you may be like, whoa, hey, wait a second, what the heck is this? Prim is only 13, so she was only 13, so what the heck is she doing in the Capitol so close to Snow's mansion? Also known as the most active part of the battlefield. Coin was most likely the one to grant Prim the title of soldier. Prim would have to be 14 years old in order to earn this title, which she was not. Like I said before, she was 13, but clearly an exception was made for her. Even though Katniss coincidentally witnessed Prim's death in person, she wouldn't have had to be there, as the city circle was littered with cameras, so that they can televise this footage to all of Panem. But why? Well, as Snow pointed out, the war was basically over at that point. Katniss assumed that maybe Coin was hoping it would push Katniss over the edge, making Katniss more agreeable to the whole Hunger Games 2.0 pitch, as well as make her more willing to be the one to execute Snow. Coin's strategy was really successful, because the last of Snow's people turned on him. But there was one person who was not fooled. The death of Prim, paired with Coin sending Peeta into the Capitol to join the Star Squad despite the fact that he tried to kill Katniss. Coin's right-hand man Boggs telling Katniss not to trust Coin, and then later Coin proposing that they have the 77th Hunger Games for the Capitol's children, made it so Katniss didn't really trust Coin. To put it lightly, Katniss was not in favor of District 13's president turning into the interim president of Panem, and potentially the permanent president of Panem. So Katniss chose to shoot Coin with an arrow instead of shooting Snow. But it's okay, because Coin was basically Snow 2.0. After the Second Rebellion, District 12 used a bunch of machines from the Capitol to break new ground for a factory that would produce a bunch of really nice medicines that they could distribute to all of Panem, which is fitting because of the whole apothecary stuff. Remember when I was talking about that like 40 minutes ago? The arenas that were preserved after every Hunger Games were destroyed, and memorials were built over them. The games would be taught in school, but they wouldn't be glorified like they were under Snow's rule. Katniss and Peeta's kids would grow up to learn how much the games changed their mom and dad. Near Katniss's old house was the scruffy field called the Meadow, the same place that Lucy Gray Baird ventured out to in order to write her music, so that she didn't disturb her neighbors. The kind of meadow that inspired the lullaby Deep in the Meadow. And catching fire, Katniss claims that she sees Rue in the yellow flowers that grow in the meadow by her house. The yellow flowers here are further reinforcing the theme of rebirth. And on top of that, after the Second Rebellion, the meadow was dramatically altered, as they made it essentially a deep pit, where they lined it with the bones of the thousands of District 12 residents who lost their lives during the war. So the meadow basically became a mass grave. Over time, like 20 years later, the meadow grew back. This is where Katniss's kids eventually ended up playing. Her kids probably have names, but like their grandmother, the first names aren't mentioned in the books and they're not mentioned in the movies. So I guess we're never gonna know.